While the Soviet leaders wanted their mummified bodies to be put in the mausoleum, I do believe that Putin succeeded to mummify the body of Russia itself.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ivan Bremmer, and today we look at Vladimir Putin's military campaign in Ukraine after 2 months of bloodshed. Where does the conflict go from here, and how much more human tragedy is on the horizon before peace can possibly be realized? This week I speak with political scientist and renowned Russia expert, who knew you could have two of those things, Ivan Krastev. He writes extensively about the state of play in Ukraine. Then a look at how the war in Ukraine is playing out in one of America's biggest Russian-speaking neighborhoods. But first,
Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that.
That was Joe Biden speaking at the White House on the day Russia invaded Ukraine 2 months ago. Vladimir Putin's strategy in Ukraine hasn't panned out as expected. Volodymyr Zelensky is still president. Kyiv has not fallen. And 2 more countries, Sweden and Finland, are preparing to join NATO in short order. The invasion was meant to last 15 days, according to documents allegedly left by invading Russian soldiers and then published by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. And the conflict has indeed cost Russia dearly. The heavy sanctions regime, led by the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, has left the Russian economy reeling, with a 15% contraction of its economy expected this year. While pariah status isn't exactly Facebook official for Vladimir Putin, there is a big question hanging over the conflict. Is a military climb down even possible if Putin can't sell his special operation, as he calls it, as a win back home? The Kremlin is shifting its focus towards capturing all of the contested Donbas region, securing a land bridge from there to Crimea, and gaining control of the port city of Kherson. But strategy from NATO countries could leave Putin without a way to save face. At a recent Pentagon briefing, the U.S. government said its intention was to defeat Russians in Ukraine and force their troops to withdraw from the country. Now, that belief has led to more willingness to provide additional support from nearly all NATO allies, including $800 million more in military aid from the Biden administration, heavier and more offensive weapons systems from just about everyone, more NATO training of Ukrainian troops, and expanded intelligence support for Kyiv. All of which could be a trigger for dramatic escalation if Putin feels as though he has no options left but to escalate. Our guest today is political scientist and author Ivan Krastev. When talking about Ukraine, he likes to mention an old Russian proverb. If you invite a bear to dance, it's not you who decides when the dance is over, it's the bear. By the way, I'm pretty sure that bear wasn't invited. Here's our conversation. Ivan Krastev, welcome to GZERO World.
Thank you very much for inviting.
I want to start with the obvious question, because from my perspective, I look at what we've seen over the last couple months, and I see the biggest miscalculation made by a major leader on the global stage since the Soviet Union has collapsed. Do you agree with that? Do you think that that is true in terms of Putin's decision to invade Ukraine? And to the extent that you do, why do you think he made that mistake?
I do believe he miscalculated, but his miscalculation cannot be easily explained simply because of a poor intelligence or basically poor performance of the Russian troops on the ground. In my view, miscalculation goes very much deeper to the way how sees the world after the end of the Cold War and what is happening there. And here there's 3 things that in my view works very much to explain why he did what he did. One is he never took the end of the Soviet Union as a natural result of the end of the communism. For him, the fact that communism was over was not a bad news, but he could not understand how it is possible that nuclear power can lose his sovereignty and basically lost its state. So from this point of view, restoring historic Russia was something that was always for him the most important thing to happen. To do this, he totally mistook and misunderstood the nature of the Russian state and the Soviet Union before. So when he said that the Russians and Ukrainians are the same people, he believed it. And this was a major miscalculation. Secondly, and in my view, this is also important for him, he really believes that the West in such a deep crisis that the West is impossible to react, that the West was going to tolerate, nevertheless, that it is not going to like what he did. But this is the problem of time. He created a system which is so much around him. It's so much a personalized regime that he wants to fix all the problems that Russia is facing in his lifetime. He mistrusts the world, but also he mistrusts his successors. This is why the idea that the time is not on his side, in my view, very much defined the fact that he wanted to do it now.
Do you think he understands how badly it is going for him? And also, do you think he understands how the permanence of the damage that's been done in terms of Russia's relationship with the West, which did hold a lot of importance for Putin and for Russia over the past 30 years?
Listen, he understands certain things, and obviously he's angry, and obviously he's very unhappy with what is happening on the ground. But according to him, and this is now for more than a decade, he believes that he's in a war with the West. So for him, the breaking with the West is not the news. In his own understanding of the world, the West is trying to weaken Russia. The West is trying to weaken him. The West is about regime change, nevertheless, of what it is saying. Secondly, he does not believe that he's so isolated in the world in the way we believe he is. And to be honest, in a certain way, he has his own arguments for this. And thirdly, while he's very unhappy what is happening on the ground, he still believes that he can turn it. He still believes that what happened in the first 1 month was just bad luck. That with a better performance on the ground, with a stronger military offensive, and this is what we're seeing in Donbas. And in Donbas, we're going to see Russian army performing better than it is performing in the last months. He believes that this is going to change the dynamics. He has not lost the hope that at the end of the day, the game can turn better for him. And this is why he's looking around and he sees, okay, the West was unified, true, but for how long? So from his point of view, he's in the beginning of a war, not at the end of it.
The biggest mistake he made was this notion that Ukraine was going to welcome him, that the Ukrainians were really Russians in disguise, because of course, the implication of this war, first and foremost, is that every Ukrainian that imaginable is going to view Russia and Putin as their permanent enemy for generations.
Totally, and I do believe here he's at his worst, because strangely enough, what is at the heart of his mistake was the experience of Crimea. During the annexation of Crimea,
which was mostly ethnic Russians, by the way.
It was an ethnic Russians, but don't forget something critically important. There was 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and they didn't fight back. And this idea that Ukrainian people deeply in their hearts are loyal to Russia, but you have this corrupt, pro-Western colonizing elite, which is working for the West. This was how he was perceiving Ukraine, as the Western protectorate and people waiting basically for him to come and to liberate them. And then this totally backfired. There is a story that for me is very powerful to understand also how much Ukraine has changed for the last 7 or 8 years. Because don't forget, 10, 11 years ago, Ukraine was the most Russia-friendly country in the world. You go on the opinion polls, they like Putin, they like Russia. This similarity of language, similarity of culture was there. So Ukraine was not Russia. He also had incredible dismissal about the Ukrainian state, that this is not a state, that they do not exist, that they cannot perform, that there is very dysfunctional. And part of it is also very much rooted in a very different way the Russians and the Ukrainians experience their states. Russians, even anti-Russian, anti-Putin Russians, has a respect for the vertical of the state. The state should be strong. And the strong state means strong leader. And you basically can disagree who is the good leader, but this is there. And the Ukrainians, it's not by accident that some of the strongest anarchist movements in Europe were very much based in Ukraine. Makhno was in Ukraine. So the idea of state is totally different. Society is stronger than the state. They basically prefer kind of a state which is not trying to oppress. You have this idea of a freedom which is very much against your own state. From this point of view, I have the feeling that Russians, not only Putin, have been historically misreading Ukraine because they're always expecting the Ukraine to view the strengths of the state in the way the Russians do it. This is the most difficult to understand your neighbors. It's more difficult to understand your relatives because you're so sure that they're like you. And then suddenly they realize it's not the case. And now he has also a problem because before, Putin never has ever faced a strong but different leader in opposition to him. For the first time, it happened to Navalny, and to see that he basically had to put him
The
in
opposition
prison.
leader who's now sitting in jail in Russia, in a labor camp.
And now you have Zelensky, and you should imagine that from Putin's point of view, the fact that now Zelensky has captured the imagination of the world, and he is the rebel leader that everybody is admiring. For him, this is the end of the world because this is a comedian. This is kind of a TV personality. For some Secret Service colonel, there is nothing more dismissive than comedian. And this comedian is not simply capturing the admiration of the world public, but resisting him, fighting him on his own game. So in my view, this is a very transformative period. And there is a lot of intelligence coming from Russia saying that President Putin is permanently angry. I can understand why he's angry.
So look, we all know that the Russians have started their so-called second phase, and they intend to take the greater Donbas, which they should have certainly better military capability of doing than going into Kiev. But what happens, let's assume they get it. Let's assume they are able to take this additional territory. They've got their land bridge to Crimea. But from what I'm hearing you say, Ivan, it's not in any way over then. In other words, this is not 2014 Redux, where they take some more territory and they say, okay, done, now we can have a ceasefire. Where do you think Putin wants this to go?
It has changed. He was first, when it started, by the way, when he said that it's a special operation, he believed it was a special operation. He didn't believe that he's starting a war. He believed it's going to be special operations, very similar to what happened in places like Crimea or before it, what the Soviet Union had been doing in Eastern Bloc. And then basically you're going to unify historic Russia. And suddenly the Ukrainians are fighting back. And not simply fighting back, but they're fighting furiously. And from his point of view, fighting without the hope of winning. And this is why for him, this became a punishment operation. So in a certain way, if you cannot convert, you should punish. If you're listening to Russian propaganda, nobody talks about Ukrainians. Russian public does not believe that Russia is fighting Ukrainians. They believe that Russia is fighting NATO or fighting West, basically fighting Americans. And this is also his story. And this is why
this was when the Moskva, when the flagship carrier was sunk. That wasn't the Ukrainians, that was NATO. That's what you see in the Russian media.
My feeling is that he will escalate. There is many things that President Putin can live with. There is one thing that he cannot live with, being perceived as weak. The perception of weakness is the curse for any authoritarian leader. Authoritarian leaders can be evil, they can be awful, they can do other things, but the moment when they're perceived as weak, they have a problem.
What do you think happens in Russia when Putin, after all of this has transpired, with a permanent break, certainly in the relations with the United States, and active hostility and conflict with NATO, what happens to Russia after Putin?
Putin basically is preoccupied with demography and Russia's demographic decline. He was repeating recently several times that if it was not for the revolution, if it was not for the World War II, if it was not for the disintegration of the Soviet Union, there are going to be 500 million Russians in the world. But now in Russia, there are less than 145 million people. So this fear of a shrinking population that is populating one of the biggest territories in the world, in my view, this is also hard to understand where all this anxiety comes from. This is becoming a problem for Russia itself. And one of the problems with Putin is that he's not allowing basically Russians to talk openly of how post-Putin Russia can look like. I do believe that we also lost the capacity to imagine a different Russia. I do believe that different Russia is probably possible, but this is the Putin effect. While the Soviet leaders wanted their mummified bodies to be put in the mausoleum, I do believe that Putin succeeded to mummify the body of Russia itself.
Ivan Krastev, powerful words to close our conversation. Thanks a lot. I hope you're wrong.
Thank you so much.
Brooklyn is home to the Nets. I love them. And also, more Russian speakers than any other city or county in the United States. Might even be a little overlap between those circles in the Venn diagram. Needless to say, the war in Ukraine has been a very big topic of conversation. GZERO's Alex Clement has this report from the beach.
Tens of thousands of immigrants from the former Soviet Union live in and around Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. Many of them came here from the Ukrainian port city of Odessa, giving the neighborhood its nickname, Little Odessa. Language is a common thread that holds people together here in America's largest Russian-speaking community. But since the war in Ukraine began, many here have sought to distance themselves from Russia itself. They include Bobby Rockman, who immigrated to the neighborhood with his family in the 1970s. Bobby runs a grocery store that was until recently called Taste of Russia.
When the war started, we felt very uncomfortable with the name Taste of Russia, even though it didn't mean anything political, but yet it kind of made people feel bad that the name Russia was associated with a store which was located in the midst of, as we call it, Little Odessa.
Just 1 week after Russia invaded Ukraine, Bobby and his business partner changed the name to International Food, and not a moment too soon. Some Russian restaurants and shops in the U.S. have been boycotted or even vandalized since the war broke out 2 months ago. Michael Levidis is the host of a popular weekly Russian-language radio show here. He says that because of the war, people are more specific about their heritage now.
People used to say, I'm Russian, even if they're from Ukraine or Uzbekistan, because they speak Russian. And just easier to tell Americans, I'm Russian. However, now people are very careful to differentiate themselves from Russians if they're from a different part of former Soviet Union. And they say, I'm actually a Ukrainian, I'm a Jew from Ukraine, or I'm a Jew from Russia.
The first big wave of Russian speakers here were Jews fleeing persecution in the Soviet Union in the 1970s. But in the years since, they've been joined by people from all across the former Soviet Union, seeking better opportunities in America. And even as the war has challenged people's cultural identities here, many are coming together to support the people of Ukraine by donating food, clothes, and money.
We feel it's us. It's not them. It's not Ukraine. It's us. It's part of us. And everybody is very disturbed what happened there.
Leah Kushnirova is a Russian Jew who emigrated to New York from Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg. Like most people out here, she hopes the violence in Ukraine will soon come to an end.
I believe if you stop any person on Brighton Beach area, they would tell you, yes, we stand for Ukraine.
For GZERO World, I'm Alex Clement.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, or you just can't wait to know what Putin's gonna do next, take a minute to sign up for GZERO's most excellent morning newsletter. It's called Signal.